The cry of a baby pierced the still morning air as the stagecoach rumbled to a stop in front of Tonopah's only hotel, sending dust swirling across the Nevada desert landscape. Tabitha James clutched her 6-month-old daughter closer to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered through the grimy window. This was the moment she'd been both dreading and longing for since she'd boarded the train in Boston nearly a week ago. "End of the line, madam," the driver called out as he swung down from his perch, his weathered face appearing at the doorway. "Tonopah, Nevada, home to the second richest silver strike in Nevada history and your future husband, I reckon." Tabitha swallowed hard and adjusted her daughter's blanket. Her future husband, the man who had no idea he was about to become a father as well as a husband. The letter in her pocket felt as if it weighed 100 pounds, the correspondence from Mr. Harrison Quinn, cattle rancher, who had advertised for a bride in the Eastern papers. "A bride, not a ready-made family. Thank you," she murmured, accepting the driver's calloused hand as she stepped down, careful to keep little Sarah bundled against the morning chill. "Is there somewhere I might freshen up before meeting Mr. Quinn?" The driver chuckled, revealing a row of tobacco-stained teeth. "The hotel's got a washroom, but I reckon you won't have much time. Quinn's been chomping at the bit to meet you, been in town since dawn, asking everyone if they'd seen the stage." Panic fluttered in Tabitha's chest. She'd planned to settle in first, perhaps find a way to ease into the revelation of Sarah's existence. Now it seemed she'd have no such luxury. As if conjured by her thoughts, a tall figure emerged from the hotel, striding purposefully toward the stage. Even from a distance, Tabitha could see the strength in his movements, the confidence in his gait. His broad shoulders filled out a simple white shirt, and a Stetson cast shadows across his face. Harrison Quinn had described himself as 30 years old, tall, and of sound body and finances. The man approaching certainly fit that description. Tabitha took a deep breath and straightened her spine. 23 years of life had taught her that facing challenges head-on was usually the best approach. She'd survived losing her parents to influenza, being cast out by her fiancé when he discovered her pregnancy, and making the grueling journey west. She could survive this moment too. "Miss James?" His voice was deep and rich, like honey over gravel. She lifted her chin. "Mr. Quinn." For a moment, neither spoke as Harrison Quinn's eyes dropped to the bundle in her arms, where Sarah had chosen that exact moment to let out a gurgling coo. His eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. Tabitha began, the carefully rehearsed speech dying on her lips. "There's something I should have mentioned in my letters." Harrison Quinn took a step closer, his blue eyes intense as they studied first the baby and then Tabitha's face. She braced herself for anger, for rejection, for the long journey back east in disgrace. Instead, a slow smile spread across his sun-bronzed face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Well now," he said softly, reaching out to gently touch the edge of Sarah's blanket. "Looks like I get 2 blessings instead of 1. The tension left Tabitha's body in a rush, leaving her lightheaded with relief. "You're not upset?" Harrison shook his head, his smile growing wider. "Miss James, out here in the West, life is precious and often too short. I advertised for a wife because I was lonely, because I wanted family. Seems to me you've brought a head start on that dream." He tipped his hat. "Now, why don't we get you ladies settled at the hotel and then we can talk proper?" As he reached for her carpetbag, Tabitha felt the first stirrings of hope. Perhaps this wild, untamed land would offer the fresh start she so desperately needed after all. The hotel room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and rocking chair positioned near the window that overlooked Tonopah's Main Street. Harrison had insisted on carrying her trunk up the stairs himself, his strength evident in the ease with which he managed the heavy load. "I'll wait downstairs while you freshen up," he said, lingering awkwardly by the door. "Take your time. The dining room serves a decent meal. We can talk over lunch before heading out to the ranch." Alone with Sarah, Tabitha sank onto the bed, her emotions a tangled mess. Relief warred with anxiety, hope with suspicion. Could any man truly be so accepting? Or was Harrison Quinn merely hiding his disappointment until they were away from prying eyes? Sarah fussed, hungry after the long journey. As Tabitha nursed her daughter, she studied her own reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her once fashionable traveling dress was crumpled and stained from the journey, her honey-brown hair escaping its pins, dark circles shadowing her green eyes. Not exactly the picture of the refined Eastern lady she'd portrayed in her letters. "What have I gotten us into, little one?" she whispered to Sarah. "Is this truly our salvation, or have I leapt from one desperate situation into another?" Sarah's only response was to continue nursing contentedly, her tiny hand curled against Tabitha's skin. After washing her face and hands in the basin, pinning her hair into a more presentable arrangement, and changing Sarah's wrappings, Tabitha made her way downstairs. She found Harrison waiting in a corner of the hotel's small dining room, his hat resting on the table beside him. He rose as she approached, pulling out a chair for her with an old-fashioned courtesy that caught her by surprise. Up close, she could better appreciate the strong lines of his face, the straight nose, firm jaw, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wasn't conventionally handsome like the society men back east, but there was character in his features and kindness in his expression. "I took the liberty of ordering for us," he said as a waitress approached with plates of stew and freshly baked bread. "Hope you don't mind." The stage usually arrives around meal times, and Mrs. Peterson always has something ready. "Thank you." Tabitha arranged Sarah in the crook of her arm, wondering how she would manage to eat. Harrison noticed her dilemma. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms. Startled, Tabitha hesitated. "You want to hold her, unless you'd rather I didn't." Something in his expression, an earnestness, perhaps, or a genuine interest, made Tabitha carefully pass Sarah to him. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he cradled the baby, tucking her against his chest with practiced ease. "You've held babies before," Tabitha observed, picking up her spoon. Harrison nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "My sister had 4 little ones before the fever took her and her husband 3 years back. The 2 oldest went to their father's family in California, but I helped with them plenty before that." Tabitha's heart squeezed. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Life's hard out here," he said simply, bouncing Sarah slightly when she began to fuss. "Which is why I reckon we should speak plainly, Miss James." Tabitha set down her spoon, her appetite fleeing. "Yes, I believe we should. Your letters never mentioned a child." "No," she met his gaze steadily. "They didn't. I assume there's a reason for that." Tabitha took a deep breath. "I was afraid you would reject my application if you knew. Most men seeking mail-order brides want unburdened women." Harrison's expression remained unreadable. "And the father, we were engaged." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "When he discovered I was with child, he broke our engagement and denied responsibility. His family is influential in Boston society. My parents were already gone, and I had no one to stand up for me. I was working as a seamstress when I saw your advertisement." Harrison studied her face, then looked down at Sarah, who had fallen asleep against his chest. "She's how old?" 6 months. "Does she have a name?" "Sarah." "Sarah Elizabeth." Harrison nodded slowly. "Sarah Elizabeth James." He tested the name, then looked back at Tabitha. "Or would it be Sarah Elizabeth Quinn, if you still intend to honor our arrangement?" Tabitha's heart skipped a beat. "You still wish to marry me, even knowing?" "Miss James, I advertised for a wife because I'm 30 years old with a ranch that's finally turning a profit, and I'm tired of coming home to an empty house each night. I want a family. I want someone to build a life with." His voice softened. "The fact that you've brought this little one along." "Well, as I said, that just means I get 2 blessings instead of 1. Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes. "Mr. Quinn, I Harrison," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you should call me Harrison." "Harrison," she repeated, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. "And I'm Tabitha." He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Tabitha and Sarah." He looked down at the sleeping baby. "You should know I'm not a wealthy man. The ranch turns a profit, but there are lean years too. The house isn't grand, 4 rooms built by my own hands. It's 10 miles outside town and the winters are harsh. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. I didn't come west seeking luxury, Tabitha assured him. I came seeking a future for my daughter, for myself. Harrison nodded. Then, if you're still willing, the preacher can marry us tomorrow morning before we head out to the ranch. He hesitated, color rising in his cheeks. I'll have a proper courtship if that's your preference, but out here, practicalities often take precedence. And folks will talk less if we're wed before I take you home. Tabitha considered his words. A day ago, she'd been a desperate woman fleeing disgrace with a fatherless child and dwindling funds. Now she was being offered protection, legitimacy for her daughter, and perhaps, in time, genuine companionship. It wasn't the romantic dream of her girlhood, but it was far more than she had dared to hope for. Tomorrow morning would be fine, she said at last. Harrison's smile returned, and he carefully handed Sarah back to Tabitha. Then let me introduce you to the town before we make it official. Tonopah's not much compared to Boston, but it's growing since the Silver Strike, and these are good people once you get to know them. As they left the hotel and stepped into the bright Nevada sunshine, Tabitha felt a curious lightness in her chest. Perhaps it was hope, she thought, or perhaps it was simply relief that the worst of her journey, both literal and figurative, appeared to be behind her. Harrison's hand rested lightly at the small of her back as he guided her down the boardwalk, nodding to the townspeople they passed. "That's Doc Miller's place," he said, pointing to a neat building with a freshly painted sign. "Good man, though he drinks more than he should. The general store's run by the Jacksons. They'll have anything you need that can be ordered from Sacramento or San Francisco." As Harrison continued his tour, introducing her to shopkeepers and townspeople, Tabitha noticed the curious glances directed at Sarah. Word would spread quickly in a town this size. By nightfall, everyone would know that Harrison Quinn's mail-order bride had arrived with an unexpected addition. "Does it bother you?" she asked quietly as they paused outside the small church where they would be married the next day. "The talk, I mean." Harrison considered her question, his eyes scanning the dusty Main Street. "There was a time when it might have," he admitted. "When I first came west, I was young and foolish, concerned with what others thought." His gaze returned to her face. "But I've buried too many good folks to waste time on small minds. Life's too short and too precious out here to fret over gossip." He touched Sarah's cheek gently, and the baby turned toward his finger, her tiny hand reaching out to grasp it. Something softened in Harrison's expression. "Besides," he added, his voice rough with emotion, "who could look at this little one and see anything but a blessing?" That evening, after Harrison had left her at the hotel with promises to return in the morning, Tabitha sat by the window watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle created from a drawer lined with blankets. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Harrison Quinn, wife to a man she barely knew, mistress of a ranch she had never seen. It was a daunting prospect, yet strangely, she felt more at peace than she had in months. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "I think we really might be all right." The wedding took place at 9 the next morning, a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Miller, with the shopkeeper's wife and the hotel proprietor serving as witnesses. Tabitha wore her best dress, a dove-gray silk that had been her mother's, and Harrison appeared in a clean black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Sarah, dressed in a white gown Tabitha had embroidered during the long journey west, slept soundly in Mrs. Peterson's arms throughout the brief service. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared, closing his Bible. "Mr. Quinn, you may kiss your bride." Harrison hesitated, seeming unsure of himself for the first time since Tabitha had met him. Then, with gentle deliberation, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both respectful and surprisingly tender. When he drew back, there was wonder in his eyes, as if he'd discovered something unexpected and precious. "Mrs. Quinn," he murmured, offering his arm. Tabitha took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. "Mr. Quinn." Outside, a wagon waited, loaded with Tabitha's trunk and several parcels Harrison had purchased that morning, supplies for the ranch, and she noted with surprise a small wooden cradle. It's not fancy, Harrison said, following her gaze. Carpenter's wife just had their fourth, so they were willing to part with their old one. Thought it might be better for the little one than whatever makeshift arrangement we could come up with at the ranch. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. Thank you. Harrison helped her and Sarah up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside them and took the reins. Ready to see your new home. As the wagon pulled away from Tonopah, Tabitha felt a curious mixture of trepidation and anticipation. She was leaving behind everything familiar, venturing into a life she could scarcely imagine with a man who was still largely a stranger. Yet there was something comforting in Harrison's solid presence beside her, in the careful way he handled the horses and the occasional glances he cast at Sarah. The journey to the ranch took most of the day, the wagon following a rutted trail that wound through the harsh desert landscape. Harrison pointed out landmarks as they traveled distant mountains. A spring where the water ran sweet and cold, the blurred outline of his nearest neighbor's homestead on the far horizon. It's beautiful, Tabitha said, gazing at the expansive landscape, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. Fierce, but beautiful. Harrison nodded, pleased by her assessment. That's the Nevada desert for you. Unforgiving if you don't respect it, but there's a freedom out here you won't find anywhere else. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Harrison pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled against a low ridge. There it is, Quinn Ranch. Tabitha squinted against the fading light. She could make out a modest cabin built of logs and stone, a large barn, what appeared to be a bunkhouse, and several corrals where cattle and horses grazed. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but it had a sturdy, welcoming appearance that spoke of care and hard work. It's lovely, she said, and meant it. Harrison's expression softened with pride. Been building it up for 8 years now, started with nothing but that one-room cabin and 20 head of cattle. He guided the wagon toward the main house. Got close to 300 head now, good grazing land with water rights, and I've added onto the house twice. As they drew closer, Tabitha could see other details: a vegetable garden enclosed by a rough fence, chickens pecking in a yard, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the cabin, furnished with a swing and several chairs that faced the sunset. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, waving a greeting. That's Jacob, Harrison explained, ranch hand. Lives in the bunkhouse with Pete and Miguel, who are probably out with the herd, good men all of them. Jacob approached the wagon as Harrison brought it to a halt in front of the house. He was younger than Harrison, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. Welcome home, boss, he called, then stopped short when he caught sight of Tabitha and the baby. His eyes widened, darting between them and Harrison. Jacob, meet my wife, Tabitha, Harrison said, his tone matter-of-fact, and our daughter, Sarah. Jacob recovered quickly, removing his hat and offering a respectful nod. Madam, it's a pleasure. His gaze lingered curiously on Sarah, but he asked no questions. Jacob, would you mind seeing to the horses and bringing Mrs. Quinn's trunk inside? Harrison asked as he helped Tabitha down from the wagon. We'll get settled and then show her around properly tomorrow. Course, boss. Jacob sprang into action, leading the tired horses toward the barn. Harrison guided Tabitha toward the house, one hand at the small of her back, the other carrying the cradle. It's not much, he said as they reached the porch, a hint of uncertainty in his voice for the first time. But it's solid. Built it myself, with help from the hands. He pushed open the door, revealing a large, open room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair and a worn sofa positioned nearby. The kitchen area featured a cast iron stove, a sink with a pump, and a large table with 6 chairs. Everything was simple but well crafted, the wood polished by years of use. This is the main room, Harrison said, setting down the cradle. Bedrooms through there, he indicated a door to the right, and I built on a second one last year through that door. Was thinking I might need it someday. His cheeks colored slightly. Reckon that'll be Sarah's room when she's older. For now, the cradle can go in with us. If that's all right with you, Tabitha was touched by his consideration. That would be perfect. Harrison cleared his throat. Outhouse is out back and there's a pump in the kitchen for water. I keep a barrel filled on the porch too for washing. Had the boys build a proper bathtub in the lean-to off the kitchen last year? He hesitated. I know it's not what you're used to coming from the east. Harrison, Tabitha said gently, shifting Sarah in her arms. It's a lovely home. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. You'll want to rest after the journey. I can show you the rest tomorrow. Jacob arrived with Tabitha's trunk, setting it down in the bedroom as directed. The room was simply furnished with a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. A colorful quilt covered the bed, and curtains framed the window that looked out toward the mountains. I'll leave you ladies to settle in, Harrison said, backing toward the door. I need to check on things with Jacob. There's food in the pantry if you're hungry, and I'll be back to start supper in a bit. After he left, Tabitha sat on the edge of the bed, bouncing Sarah gently as she took in her new surroundings. The room was masculine but clean, with a faint scent of soap and leather. On the chest of drawers stood a small photograph in a wooden frame, a family portrait showing a younger Harrison with what must be his parents and sister. Well, Sarah, she whispered, this is our new home. The baby gurgled in response, waving tiny fists in the air. Tabitha changed Sarah's wrappings and laid her in the cradle, then unpacked a few essentials from her trunk. She washed her face and hands in the basin, smoothed her hair, and changed into a fresh dress before returning to the main room. Determined to be useful, she explored the kitchen, finding a well-stocked pantry with preserved fruits, vegetables, and meats. She had just begun preparing a simple supper when Harrison returned, looking momentarily surprised to find her at the stove. You didn't have to do that, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. I wanted to. Tabitha stirred the pot of beans she had found. I hope you don't mind me using your supplies. They're your supplies now, too. Harrison washed his hands at the sink, then hesitated before adding, I don't expect you to take on everything at once. Settling into a new place takes time. I appreciate that, Tabitha said, but I'd rather keep busy. Idleness has never suited me. Harrison smiled, the expression lighting his weather-beaten face. Then we'll suit each other well because there's never a shortage of work on a ranch. They ate supper at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing more easily than Tabitha had expected. Harrison asked about her journey west, and she told him of the characters she'd encountered on the train and stagecoach. In turn, he spoke of the ranch, the spring calving, his plans for expanding the herd, the challenges of the previous winter. I should warn you, he said as they finished the meal, winters can be harsh here. We get cut off sometimes when the snow's bad. I grew up in Boston, Tabitha reminded him. I'm no stranger to snow. Eastern snow and Nevada blizzards are different beasts, Harrison said, his expression serious. But we'll be prepared. I'll make sure of it. As the evening waned, Sarah began to fuss, hungry and tired after the long day's journey. Tabitha excused herself to nurse her in the bedroom, and when she returned, she found Harrison had cleared the table and was washing the dishes, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. She's asleep, Tabitha said, setting a lamp on the table. Harrison nodded, drying his hands on a towel. You must be tired too. A little, Tabitha admitted. An awkward silence fell between them as the reality of their situation became impossible to ignore. They were strangers who had married that morning, and now night had fallen. Harrison cleared his throat. I can sleep in the second bedroom, or out in the bunkhouse with the hands if you'd prefer. Tabitha studied him in the lamplight. He was offering her space, time to adjust, and she appreciated the gesture. But they were married now, and postponing the inevitable would only make it more awkward later. That won't be necessary, she said quietly. We're husband and wife now. Something flared in Harrison's eyes, relief, perhaps, or anticipation. I don't want you to feel rushed. I don't. Tabitha managed a small smile. But I would like to know the man I've married. Harrison stepped closer, moving slowly as if afraid of startling her. I'd like that too. His hand, when it cupped her cheek, was rough with calluses but infinitely gentle. Tabitha leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as his thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. "You're beautiful," he murmured. "I couldn't believe my luck when you stepped off that stage, even with Sarah." Tabitha couldn't help asking, especially with Sarah. Harrison's voice was firm. "I told you, Tabitha, I've wanted a family. You've brought me one ready-made, and I count myself blessed twice over." When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. This wasn't the passionate embrace of romantic novels, but something more profound, a promise, a beginning, a commitment to the life they would build together. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Harrison's arm a warm weight across her waist. Tabitha listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the sage, the occasional call of a night bird. So different from the ceaseless noise of Boston, yet strangely comforting in its wildness. Harrison's breathing had deepened into sleep, his face relaxed in repose. In slumber, the lines of care and responsibility eased from his features, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Tabitha studied him in the moonlight filtering through the window, this man who was now her husband, the guardian of her future and Sarah's. "Thank you," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her, "for taking us in, for giving us a home." As if in response, Harrison drew her closer in his sleep, murmuring something indistinct but comforting. Tabitha closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax fully for the first time in months. They were strangers still, yes, but no longer alone. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, was a beginning worth building on. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Tabitha adjusted to life on the ranch. Harrison was patient, taking time each day to show her the workings of their home and the land that sustained it. He introduced her to the cattle, the horses, the rhythm of ranch life that rose and fell with the sun. "These are our livelihood," he explained as they stood at the corral fence watching a group of calves frolic in the morning light. "Each spring, the new calves are born. We keep the best for breeding, sell most of the others when they're grown. It's not an easy life, but it's a good one." Tabitha watched him as he spoke, noting the pride in his voice, the way his eyes tracked the movements of the herd with a stockman's keen assessment. This was a man who loved his work, who had built something from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. "You've accomplished so much here," she said. "You should be proud." Harrison's gaze shifted to her, a hint of surprise in his expression. Most women wouldn't see it that way. "Living out here miles from town with none of the comforts of city life." "I'm not most women," Tabitha reminded him. His smile was slow and appreciative. "No, you certainly are not, Mrs. Quinn." The hands Jacob, Pete, and Miguel were initially wary of the new mistress of the ranch, especially one who had arrived with an unexpected baby in tow. But Tabitha won them over with her cooking, her willingness to learn, and her lack of airs. By the end of the first month, Jacob was bringing her wildflowers he found on the range, Pete was carving a set of wooden animals for Sarah, and Miguel was teaching her Spanish phrases as they worked together in the garden. The garden became Tabitha's particular domain. Years of tending her mother's small plot in Boston had given her a knack for coaxing life from soil, and she expanded the existing garden with enthusiasm, adding herbs and vegetables that would see them through the coming winter. "My mother always said a good garden is worth its weight in gold," she told Harrison as they worked side by side one evening, pulling weeds as Sarah napped in a basket in the shade. "Especially in hard times," Harrison nodded, his hands gentle as they worked the soil. "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was," Tabitha paused, memories washing over her. "She would have liked you, I think. I hope so." Harrison's voice was soft. "I wish I could have known her, known your father too." "What about your parents?" Tabitha asked, nodding toward the photograph she had seen in their bedroom. Harrison's expression grew distant. "Pa died when I was 22, had a dream of coming west, striking it rich in the silver mines, never quite made it." He sifted soil through his fingers. "Ma held on another 3 years, but I think her heart went with him. My sister Clara was the last of my family until the fever took her and her husband." Tabitha reached across the garden row to touch his arm. "I'm sorry." Harrison covered her hand with his own. "That's why this place means so much to me. It's what Pa dreamed of, even if he never saw it." And now it'll be Sarah's someday, and any other children we might have. The mention of future children sent a flutter through Tabitha's stomach. In the month they had been married, Harrison had proven to be a considerate husband, both in daily life and in the privacy of their bedroom. The awkwardness of their first night together had given way to a deepening physical connection that sometimes left Tabitha breathless with its intensity. Yet it was the smaller moments that were cementing her growing affection for him, the way he rose before dawn to start the fire so she and Sarah would wake to a warm house. How he carved out time each day to spend with Sarah, talking to her as if she understood every word. The gentle touches he bestowed on Tabitha as they passed each other in their daily tasks. "Do you want more children?" she asked, suddenly curious. Harrison's eyes met hers, serious and searching. "I do, a houseful if you're willing, but I'm in no rush, Tabitha. Sarah's still young and you're just settling in here." The consideration in his voice warmed her. "I'd like that too." "A houseful?" His smile was like sunrise breaking across the horizon. "Then we'll have one, in time." As spring blended into summer, the days grew hotter, the air shimmering above the desert floor. Tabitha learned to rise early to complete the household chores before the worst of the heat set in, and to appreciate the cool evenings when they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors. Sarah thrived in the clear desert air, growing plumper and more active by the day. She began to crawl, exploring the cabin with determined focus, and Harrison built a small fence around the porch so she could play outside safely while Tabitha worked nearby. "She's got your determination," Harrison observed one evening as they watched Sarah repeatedly attempt to pull herself up on a chair leg. "Won't quit until she gets what she's after." "She has your patience," Tabitha countered, noting how the baby would pause, reassess, and try again with methodical persistence. Harrison laughed, the sound rich and warm in the twilight. "Poor child, saddled with both our stubborn streaks, she'll be a force to reckon with. She already is." Tabitha leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never expected to be when she boarded that train in Boston. The first real test of their new life came in late summer, when Harrison was thrown from a horse while working with the herd far from the ranch house. Jacob rode in at dusk, his face grim, to tell Tabitha that Harrison was injured and the men were bringing him home. "How bad?" Tabitha asked, her heart pounding as she clutched Sarah to her chest. "Arms broken for sure," Jacob said, avoiding her eyes. "Maybe some ribs too. Hit his head when he fell, been in and out of consciousness." Tabitha swallowed her fear, years of managing her parents' household through illness snapping into focus. "Ride for the doctor in Tonopah, I'll prepare things here." By the time Pete and Miguel arrived with Harrison laid out in the back of the wagon, Tabitha had transformed the main room into a sick room, with clean linens, boiled water, and the few medical supplies they kept on hand. The sight of Harrison pale, bloodied, his arm at an unnatural angle nearly undid her composure, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Put him on the bed," she directed, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Gently now." The men obeyed, their faces grave as they settled Harrison onto the sheets. He groaned, his eyes flickering open momentarily before closing again. "Jacob's gone for the doctor," Tabitha told them, already beginning to cut away Harrison's bloodied shirt. "But it'll be hours before they can get here. I need one of you to stay and help me. The others should see to the horses and then get some rest." Miguel volunteered, his hands steady as he followed Tabitha's instructions, helping to clean Harrison's wounds and immobilize his broken arm as best they could. He spoke softly in Spanish as they worked, the cadence soothing even though Tabitha understood only a few words. "Prayers," she guessed, catching Dios and Procher. Miguel nodded. "For the patron, he is a good man." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, her throat tight as she laid a cool cloth on Harrison's forehead. "He is." Through the long night, she sat beside her husband, bathing his fevered skin, murmuring reassurances when he stirred in pain, and praying with a fervor she hadn't felt since her parents' final illness. Sarah, sensing the tension in the house, was fretful, and Tabitha nursed her frequently, trying to soothe them both. Dawn was breaking when Harrison finally regained full consciousness, his blue eyes clouded with pain but lucid as they focused on Tabitha's face. "You're here," he murmured, his voice rough. "Where else would I be?" Tabitha took his good hand, pressing it between both of hers. A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Thought I might have dreamed you, you and Sarah." Tabitha's heart clenched. "We're real, and you're going to be fine." "Jacob's bringing the doctor." Harrison's eyes drifted to where Sarah lay sleeping in her cradle. "Take care of her if I don't," Tabitha interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare talk like that, Harrison Quinn. You're not going anywhere." His fingers tightened around hers. "Not if I can help it," he agreed. "Got too much to live for now." The doctor arrived mid-morning, his face grim as he examined Harrison's injuries. The arm was indeed broken, as were 2 ribs, and the head wound was concerning but not immediately life-threatening. "He'll need rest, doctor," Miller told Tabitha as he prepared to set the broken bone. "Complete rest for at least 2 weeks, then limited duties for another month minimum. No riding, no heavy lifting." Tabitha nodded, already calculating how they would manage. The ranch couldn't run itself, and the hands couldn't do everything without Harrison's direction. "I'll make sure of it," she promised. Setting the bone was an ordeal that left Harrison ashen and trembling, despite the whiskey the doctor administered beforehand. Tabitha held his good hand throughout, murmuring encouragement, her heart breaking at each suppressed sound of pain. "You've got yourself a fine wife, Quinn," Dr. Miller observed as he packed up his supplies. "Not many women would handle all this with such composure." Harrison's eyes, glazed with pain and whiskey, found Tabitha's face. "Knew that the moment I saw her," he said, his words slightly slurred, "standing there with Sarah in her arms, looking like she could take on the world." "Well, she'll be taking on quite a bit while you recover," the doctor warned. "I'll be back in a week to check on you. Try not to undo my work before then." After the doctor left, Tabitha organized the hands, assigning tasks that would keep the ranch running in Harrison's absence. Jacob would oversee the cattle, Pete the horses, and Miguel would help Tabitha with the household chores and garden. "We'll manage," she assured Harrison when he fretted about the work going undone. "The ranch won't fall apart in a few weeks." "It's too much for you," he argued, trying to sit up despite the pain. "With Sarah and the house and now playing nurse to me, Harrison Quinn, lie back down this instant." Tabitha's voice brooked no argument. "I managed my parents' household through illness for years. I ran a seamstress business while carrying and caring for a baby. I traveled across the country alone with an infant. I think I can handle a few weeks of extra chores." Harrison subsided, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, madam." Those weeks of Harrison's recovery transformed their relationship in ways neither had anticipated. Forced to rely on Tabitha for everything from meals to washing, Harrison saw a strength in his wife that went beyond what he had first appreciated. And Tabitha, taking on the management of the ranch alongside her usual duties, developed a deeper understanding of Harrison's work and the legacy he was building. They talked more during those long days of convalescence than they had in all the weeks prior about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Harrison spoke of his early years on the ranch, the failures and near disasters that had taught him resilience. Tabitha shared stories of her life in Boston, the society she had once been part of, and the painful rejection that had sent her west. "I never thanked you properly," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, Harrison's arm still splinted but his color much improved. "For accepting Sarah. For giving her your name." Harrison's good hand found hers in the twilight. "Tabitha, from the moment I saw her, she was mine in every way that matters. Blood doesn't make a family, love does." Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes. "When did you get so wise, Harrison Quinn?" "Must be all those books you've been reading to me while I've been laid up." He grinned, then sobered. "I love her, Tabitha, as much as if she'd been born of my blood, and he hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "And you," Tabitha prompted, her heart beating faster. Harrison's gaze met hers, vulnerable and open in a way she hadn't seen before. "And I love her mother, too." The words hung in the evening air between them, momentous and fragile. They had married as strangers, coming together out of mutual need and practicality. Love had not been part of the arrangement, yet here it was, sprouting like one of Tabitha's garden seedlings, tender but determined. "I love you too," Tabitha whispered, the truth of it washing through her with the force of a desert flash flood. "I didn't expect to, but I do." Harrison pulled her close with his good arm, his kiss a tender affirmation of the words they had just exchanged. When they broke apart, his smile was brighter than the emerging stars overhead. "Reckon that makes us the luckiest folks in Nevada territory," he murmured against her hair. As summer faded into fall, Harrison regained his strength, though he continued to favor his injured arm. The harvest from Tabitha's garden was bountiful, and she spent long days preserving vegetables and fruits for the winter ahead. Sarah, now almost a year old, took her first tottering steps across the cabin floor, falling into Harrison's waiting arms with a peal of delighted laughter. "She's walking already," Tabitha marveled, watching as Harrison encouraged Sarah to try again. "The doctor in Boston said she might be delayed, being born a bit early." "Delayed? This one?" Harrison chuckled as Sarah lurched forward again, determination written across her small face. "She'll be running circles around us by Christmas." The prediction proved accurate. By the time the first snow dusted the mountains in early December, Sarah was mobile enough to keep both parents constantly vigilant, her curious nature leading her to explore every corner of the cabin and, when permitted, the yard beyond. "She's got her mama's spirit," Harrison would say proudly, watching as Sarah fearlessly approached one of the gentler horses or reached for a chicken that had wandered too close. "And her papa's calm," Tabitha would counter, noting how Sarah would study a situation before plunging in, her baby brow furrowed in concentration that mimicked Harrison's own thoughtful expression. The ease with which they had fallen into referring to Harrison as Sarah's father still sometimes caught Tabitha by surprise. There were moments when she would look up to see him cradling Sarah, singing softly as he rocked her to sleep, and her heart would swell with a love so profound it left her breathless. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked one such evening, catching her watching them from the doorway. "That I'm grateful," Tabitha said simply, "for everything that brought us here." Harrison's smile was tender as he laid Sarah in her cradle. "Even the hard parts, even those," Tabitha nodded, "they led us to you." As Christmas approached, Tabitha threw herself into preparations, determined to make their first holiday as a family special. She baked cookies using precious sugar and spices, sewed new dresses for herself and Sarah from fabric she had ordered from the general store, and worked secretly on gifts for Harrison and the hands when they were out with the cattle. Harrison, too, disappeared into his workshop more frequently, emerging with sawdust in his hair and a secretive smile that made Tabitha's curiosity burn. When she tried to peek inside, he shooed her away with mock severity. "No peeking until Christmas morning, Mrs. Quinn. That's the rule." The holiday itself dawned clear and cold, the desert landscape transformed by a light coating of overnight snow that glittered in the morning sun. Sarah, now officially a year old, was more interested in the colorful paper wrappings than the simple toys and clothing she received, but her delight in the festivities was infectious. When it came time to exchange their gifts, Harrison brought out a large object covered with a blanket. "For you and Sarah both," he said, his eyes alight with anticipation. Tabitha pulled away the covering to reveal a beautifully crafted rocking horse, painted white with a real horsehair mane and tail. It was sized perfectly for a small child, with sturdy handles and a low seat that would grow with Sarah. "Harrison, it's beautiful," Tabitha breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You made this." He nodded, watching as Sarah immediately toddled over to investigate, her small hands patting the horse's nose. "Been working on it since I could use my arm properly again. Wanted her to have something special for her first Christmas with us." Tabitha's gift to Harrison seemed modest in comparison: a new shirt she had sewn, a book of poetry she had ordered from San Francisco, and a small framed drawing she had made of Sarah. But his reaction was everything she could have hoped for, his eyes suspiciously bright as he examined each item. "There's one more thing," Tabitha said, suddenly nervous. "Though it's not exactly a gift I can wrap." Harrison looked up from the drawing, his expression curious. "Oh," Tabitha took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach. "If all goes well, by next summer, Sarah will have a little brother or sister." For a moment, Harrison simply stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then, with a whoop that startled both Tabitha and Sarah, he swept Tabitha into his arms, lifting her off her feet in a careful embrace. "A baby, our baby." His voice was choked with emotion. Tabitha nodded, laughing through the tears that had sprung to her eyes. "Our baby." Harrison set her gently on her feet, then knelt to gather Sarah into his arms as well. "Did you hear that, little one? You're going to be a big sister." Sarah, not understanding but caught up in the excitement, clapped her hands and giggled. Harrison looked up at Tabitha, his face alight with joy. "When I saw you step off that stage with Sarah in your arms, I thought I was getting 2 blessings instead of 1, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I had no idea just how blessed I would truly be." That night, after Sarah was asleep and they had retreated to their own bed, Harrison held Tabitha close, his hand resting protectively over the place where their child grew. "Are you happy, Tabitha?" he asked, his voice quiet in the darkness. "Truly happy, out here with me, away from all the comforts you knew back east?" Tabitha considered the question, thinking of the life she had left behind, the society that had shunned her, the struggle to survive on her own, the fear that had been her constant companion. Then she thought of the months since arriving in Tonopah, the hard work. Yes, but also the sense of purpose, the connection to the land, the growing love between her and Harrison, and the security of knowing Sarah would be raised in a home filled with affection and respect. "I've never been happier," she said truthfully. "This is where I belong, with you and Sarah and our new little one on the way. This is home." Harrison's arms tightened around her, his breath warm against her neck. "Then I'm the richest man in Nevada territory," he murmured, "and that's a fact." Winter settled over the ranch, bringing short days and long nights spent by the fire. Tabitha's pregnancy progressed without complications, her body blossoming in a way that Harrison found endlessly fascinating. Unlike her first pregnancy, which had been marked by fear and secrecy, this one was celebrated openly, with Harrison taking extra care to ensure Tabitha didn't overexert herself. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she would protest when he insisted on bringing in the firewood or drawing water from the well. "Humor me," Harrison would reply, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I missed this the first time around, let me fuss a little." The hands were equally protective, with Jacob constructing a more comfortable chair for the kitchen, Pete ensuring the choicest cuts of meat made their way to the house, and Miguel expanding the garden fence in preparation for spring planting. Their genuine concern for Tabitha and excitement about the coming baby touched her deeply. "They're like family," she remarked to Harrison one evening as they prepared for bed. "They are family," he corrected gently. "Out here, the people who stand by you through blizzards and droughts and hard times, those are your kin, blood or no." February brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. Cut off from town and neighbors, they relied on their stored provisions and each other's company to weather the storm. Harrison read aloud from his small collection of books. Sarah learned new words at an astonishing rate, and Tabitha sewed tiny garments for the baby, using scraps of fabric and bits of lace she had saved. When the snow finally cleared enough for travel, Harrison rode into Tonopah for supplies and mail, returning with letters from Tabitha's old friend in Boston and a package containing a beautiful hand-knit baby blanket. "Margaret writes that Boston society is all aflutter about some scandal involving the Prestons," Tabitha told Harrison as she read the letter by lamplight. "Apparently, James Preston," she broke off, her face suddenly pale. Harrison looked up from where he was playing with Sarah on the floor. "Tabitha, what is it?" Tabitha's hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter. "Nothing important, just gossip." But later, when Sarah was asleep and they were alone, she showed him the letter. "James Preston was engaged to be married to the Aldrich girl," she said quietly. The same James Preston who was engaged to me, who denied fathering Sarah when I told him I was expecting. Harrison's expression darkened. The same man who cast you out without support, Tabitha nodded. According to Margaret, the engagement has been broken because James was caught in a compromising position with one of the housemaids. The girl is with child, and the Prestons are sending her away to have the baby in secret. Her voice was bitter. Just as they suggested I should do. Harrison took the letter, reading the passage with a deepening frown. And this man still moves in good society. That's how it works in Boston, Tabitha said. Men like James are protected by their family names and fortunes. Women like me, like that poor housemaid, bear the consequences alone. Harrison set the letter aside and took Tabitha's hands in his. Do you ever regret it, leaving, coming west? Tabitha shook her head firmly. Never. If I had stayed, if I had given Sarah up as the Prestons suggested, or hidden away in shame as my so-called friends advised, I would never have found you, never known this life, this happiness. Harrison kissed her palms, then drew her into his embrace. Then I'm grateful for James Preston's cruelty, he murmured against her hair. It brought you and Sarah to me. Spring arrived early that year, the desert bursting into brief, spectacular bloom as wildflowers carpeted the normally arid landscape. The cattle began calving, keeping Harrison and the hands busy day and night. Tabitha, now in her 7th month and moving more slowly, focused on the garden and preparing the house for the new arrival. I want to paint the 2nd bedroom, she told Harrison over breakfast one morning. Make it properly Sarah's, now that she's outgrown the cradle. The baby can use the cradle in our room at first, Harrison nodded thoughtfully. I could ride into town, see if they've got any paint at the general store. What color were you thinking? Yellow, Tabitha decided. Like sunshine. The following week, Harrison and Jacob spent 2 days transforming the small bedroom, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and building a proper child-sized bed for Sarah. Tabitha watched their work with satisfaction, one hand resting on her rounded belly as the baby kicked vigorously. Someone's eager to join the family, Harrison observed, placing his hand beside hers to feel the movement. Or protesting the paint fumes, Tabitha teased, though she had kept Sarah well away from the room until the paint dried. As her time drew nearer, Harrison insisted on bringing in a midwife to stay at the ranch. Mrs. Oakes, a formidable woman in her 60s who had delivered most of the children in Tonopah and the surrounding ranches, arrived 2 weeks before Tabitha's expected date, her carpet bag filled with the tools of her trade. First babies are often late, she pronounced after examining Tabitha. Second ones, though, they sometimes come early. Best I'm here, just in case. Her presence was a comfort, especially when Harrison was called away to deal with a breach in the irrigation system that threatened their water supply. Tabitha had grown used to the rhythm of ranch life, with its unexpected crises and demands, but as her body grew heavier with child, she found herself grateful for Mrs. Oakes's practical assistance and no-nonsense advice. You're carrying low, the midwife observed as they shelled peas on the porch, watching Sarah chase butterflies in the yard. Might be a boy this time. Harrison would like that, Tabitha said, smiling at the thought. Though he adores Sarah so much, I think he'd be just as happy with another girl. Mrs. Oakes nodded approvingly. Good man, your husband. Not all men take to another man's child the way he has with your little one. Sarah is his in every way that matters, Tabitha said firmly. He's the only father she's ever known or ever will know. The baby arrived on a clear May morning, heralded by labor pains that woke Tabitha just before dawn. Harrison, who had become a light sleeper as her time approached, was instantly alert. Is it time? He asked, his voice husky with sleep but his eyes sharp with concern. Tabitha nodded, breathing through the contraction that gripped her. I think so. Would you wake Mrs. Oakes? The next hours passed in a blur of pain and focused effort. Unlike Sarah's birth, which had been attended by a stern-faced doctor in a Boston charity hospital, where unwed mothers were treated with clinical detachment, this labor was supported by Mrs. Oakes's capable hands and Harrison's unwavering presence. He held Tabitha's hand, bathed her forehead with cool cloths, and murmured encouragement as she worked to bring their child into the world. "You're the strongest woman I know, Tabitha Quinn," he told her as the labor intensified. "You can do this. Our baby is nearly here." Just past noon, with a final tremendous effort, Tabitha delivered a robust baby boy with a shock of dark hair and a cry that filled the room with its vigor. "A son," Mrs. Oakes announced, cleaning and swaddling the infant with practiced efficiency. "A fine, healthy son." Exhausted but triumphant, Tabitha held out her arms to receive her child. The moment he was placed against her chest, a love so fierce it took her breath away swept through her. She looked up to find Harrison watching them, his eyes brimming with tears. "He's perfect," Harrison whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." When Sarah was brought in to meet her new brother a short while later, her initial wariness gave way to fascination as the baby grasped her offered finger. "Baby," she declared, looking up at Harrison for confirmation. "That's right, sweetheart," he said, lifting her onto the bed beside Tabitha. "This is your brother. His name is James Harrison Quinn." Tabitha looked up in surprise. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. James. Harrison's expression was solemn. "For the man who was fool enough to let you go, sending you west to me, seems fitting that his loss became my greatest gain." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at the generosity of spirit in Harrison's gesture. "James Harrison Quinn," she repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect." That evening, with Sarah asleep in her new bed and baby James nestled in the cradle beside them, Harrison and Tabitha sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. The ranch was quiet, the day's work complete, a sense of peace settling over the land they had come to love. "I used to wonder what my life would be like if things had gone differently in Boston," Tabitha mused, her head resting on Harrison's shoulder. "If James had acknowledged Sarah, if we had married as planned." Harrison's arm tightened around her. "And now I know I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." She lifted her face to his. "With the man I was meant to love." Harrison's kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the bond that had grown between them, forged through shared work, mutual respect, and the family they had created together. "When you stepped off that stage coach with Sarah in your arms, I thought I was getting two blessings instead of one," Harrison said, echoing the words he'd spoken on their first meeting. "But the truth is, Tabitha, you've given me more blessings than I can count." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert and the soft breathing of their children through the open window. They had begun as strangers brought together by circumstance and necessity, but had found in each other the love and family they both had longed for. And in the years that followed, through droughts and blizzards, good harvests and lean ones, the addition of two more children to their growing family that love only deepened, as enduring as the land they called home. For Tabitha James Quinn, who had once boarded a stagecoach in desperation with a fatherless baby in her arms, the journey west had led not to the hardship and isolation she had feared, but to the warmest welcome and the truest love she could have imagined. And for Harrison Quinn, the mail-order bride who had brought an unexpected baby, had indeed proven to be a double blessing, the beginning of the family that would be his greatest legacy. In the wild heart of Nevada, they had found each other, and in doing so had found themselves and the home they had both been seeking all along.